We go. Okay, we are learning chapter Nun Beis 52. And remember, as we pointed out, these last three chapters of the Sefer Shel Beinanim were not present in some of the earlier manuscripts. And there is a thought that they are in a certain way very different than what we've been learning until now. They're a little bit of a newer nuance or different style or something along those lines. And thus they a little bit more cross into the mystical more than the strategic, pragmatic that we are accustomed to. All of Tanya is based on the pasuk, behold, it is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. So everything in Tanya has to contribute to the strategies and tactics for how we can experience a close personal relationship with Hashem. And now that we are the second to last, or, and it's not often you get to use the word penultimate, it's one of our favorite words, the penultimate chapter of Tanya, which means the second to last chapter of Tanya, we are, the Alter Rebbe is taking us into a little bit more of a mystical lineup. Now, just as a sort of a preview, the next section of Tanya is called Shar HaYichud VaAmunah, translation, the gate into the singularity or the unity and trust in Hashem. Now, the Alter Rebbe actually wrote the Shar HaYichud VaAmunah before he wrote the Sefer Shel Beinanim, and on a few occasions, there's actually an odd usage of the term where it says, as we will explain, but he already explained it, because the Alter Rebbe, as I said, is writing Shar HaYichud VaAmunah first, but he decided to publish the Sefer Shel Beinanim, which is what we're learning now and almost finishing, the book of the intermediate man. He decided to publish that first. So the question is, what are the two strategies as to which one you publish first? So there's two ways to look at it. The next section of Tanya, not what we're learning now, but I'll circle back to it, I hope, is the description of, or an opportunity for us to have an insight into Hashem, sort of directly. Like, what does it mean when we say that God is one, God is infinite, but yet I seem to exist and the physical world seems to exist? God says, I'm the same before the world was created, I'm the same after the world was created, but isn't the world here, and doesn't the world have meaning, et cetera, et cetera. So it's much more of a description, an analysis, an insight into the very essence of Hashem's existence. In contrast to this book, which is the book about people. And in the book about people, it's about how people can have a meaningful, transformative, and uplifting personal relationship with Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe sort of had these two perspectives. Which do you start with? You first start explaining to people who Hashem is, and then you start to explain to them how they can have a relationship with Hashem. Or do you first start talking about having a relationship with Hashem, and then you start talking about who Hashem is? Now, at the risk of running a little bit too far afield here, we actually had it in the Parsha yesterday, which concluded the book of Shmois, and it concluded the building of the Mishkan, where it tells us that Bezalel, who was the chief project runner of the whole project, obeyed, he did all that Moshe commanded. All that Hashem commanded through Moshe. So, of course, we asked the question, well, that seems rather obvious. I mean, you hire the guy, he does what he's supposed to do. So what does it mean when we say that he did all that God commanded through Moshe? So Rashi tells us that there was actually a dispute between Bezalel and Moshe as to whether you should first build the furnishings of the Mishkan, the menorah, the table, the incense altar, etc., and then you build the Mishkan, or do you first build the Mishkan and then you build the furnishings? Meaning, when a person sets out conceptually, even a private person, to build their own home, so do they think first about the structure of the home, or do they think about the furniture? And you could sort of see both sides of it. One side is, well, you have the house, and then you fit the furniture around. And you say, well, I really want to be able to have a dining room table to have 20 guests, and I want to have a living room where I can sit with my family, and I want to have a play area for my kids, et cetera, et cetera. And then you build the house around that. So this is, in a certain sense, metaphorically, what we're talking about in our relationship here with the description of who Hashem is and the relationship with Hashem. So can you have a relationship? Can you talk about the details of relationship with Hashem without knowing who Hashem is? Or do you first have to know who Hashem is, and then you can have the relationship with him? So ultimately, as we see, the Alter Rebbe made the decision that he's going to talk about how we have the relationship, and then we're going to talk about Hashem. So that's why the book of the Intermediate Man, which is the description of the relationship, precedes in publishing the book of understanding who Hashem is, almost like what Hashem is, whatever the proper pronoun would be there. Now, as we are at the end, literally the last two chapters, it's really the last three chapters, including the one we did last, the last one, chapter 51, we are now sort of transitioning from the strategies and tactics for the personal relationship into understanding who the person is. And again, if we think about this, even in our interpersonal human relationships, you meet somebody and you start to become friendly with them, and they're your classmate, your work partner, your friend, a family member, etc. And then over the course, or via the process, better, of learning how to be in a relationship with the person, you start to learn about the person. So we start at something very pragmatic, and we work into something more in depth. And again, this is mirrored in our strategy. We always come back to the applicable aspect to it. So what is more Chabad than, excuse me, are you Jewish? Yes, shake the lulav and esrog. Now, we don't say to them, excuse me, are you Jewish? Let me explain to you what it means to be Jewish. Let me explain to you what it means to have Hashem. Let me explain to you what it means to serve Hashem and to have mitzvahs. Now, I could tell you that there is a strategy out there in the Torah world that says, yes, that's what you should do. Meaning, why are you stopping the guy in cold, doing a mitzvah with him? First, you should explain to him, what is a mitzvah? What does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be obligated? What does it mean to be commanded? What is the historical, spiritual significance of this whole process? But we don't do that. That's not our strategy. But there is such a philosophy that why are you putting on tefillin with the person who doesn't even know what tefillin is? First, you should explain to him what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be in a relationship with Hashem, et cetera, and then. And again, I'm not mocking it, but it's not our strategy, as we see here, illuminated or directed, guided by the Alter Rebbe. We're first going to talk about the pragmatic, how we're going to be in a relationship with Hashem, what we're going to do, how we're going to manifest that, and then we're going to start talking about the infinity of Hashem. Now, ultimately, you really can't separate these two. They're not mathematical that you can absolutely bifurcate them and keep them in separate buckets. They're going to flow into each other. And again, you think about this in our own personal life, the more we interact with somebody, even if it's in a pragmatic way, even if you're fixing their computer, you get to know the person because that helps you be a better provider for the service that they need, et cetera, et cetera. Concurrently here, the more we talk about our relationship with Hashem, the more we are able to the more we talk about our relationship with Hashem, the more we get, or we start to get, a little bit of an insight. And that's really what we're going to get here in this chapter, in chapter 52, because we're going to continually hear the theme that we began in the previous chapter, which is a little bit more conceptual than it is about the pragmatic, which is this essential question: how can we, limited human beings, be in a relationship with the unlimited, infinite Hashem? That's the essential question that these last few chapters. So you could see is sort of the bridge characteristic. On the one hand, we are talking about the infinite Hashem, and concurrently, we're also talking about, well, how can we be in a relationship with the infinite Hashem? So we're starting to, again, get this transitional point from the book of the Intermediate Man leading into Shar Yichud V'Amunah, which is the next section of the Tanya. See, here we go. Parak Nun Beis, chapter 52. And you see, again, it begins with the letter Vav, as we've talked about for every chapter that begins with the letter Vav, which is most chapters. This means that it's a continuum of the previous point that we have discussed in the past. So, just like in the person, in our neshama, Iker Giloi Klolos Hachayis Hu B'Moichen, the primary evidence, where we see it, where do we recognize the distinctive human capacity? what is it that is most revelatory of my individual character, is to be found in the moichen. Moichen translation is the mind. And I want to do a few lines, and then we're going to come back to underscore this. V'chol evarim, in every aspect of my limbs, mekablim receives or light, v'koyach, and strength. Levad hameil hamimakar giliachai shemamoichen, exclusively from that which is revealed to them via the revelation of the life force that is in the moich, in the mind. Now, it's important, of course, we're not here to study biology, so this isn't a detailed analysis of the central nervous system, although that becomes an opportunity for us to have some insight. But it is not absolute that we are, what's the word I'm looking for, fixated on that kind of relationship and that kind of analogy of the biological system, although it's a helpful thing. Now, we've explained that Iker Chayes. So this is sort of or Iker Gilei Klolos HaChayes, the primary revelation of our general life force. So let's back up. We remember that in the creation of human beings, unlike the creation of every other entity, there is a two-step process. God formed man from the dust of earth, and then God blew into his nostrils, and this is the word nishmas, neshama, the breath of life. So every other creation, God said, let there be light. God said, let there be the sky. God said, let there be the grass, the trees, the animals, the angels. Everything else is created by God's statement. And as the Alter Rebbe pointed out way back in the very beginning of Tanya, that why, or what we can learn from the distinction of how God created human beings, that we are not just said, God didn't just say, I mean, why couldn't we say, God said, let there be human beings. And then we would be carbon breathing, upright, bipedal, opposable thumbs, etc. Why is it that God doesn't just say, let there be human beings? So we explain, amongst many other nuances, that everything that is created with God's statement, it just is that. It doesn't ever grow. It doesn't ever transform. Now, of course, a puppy will become a full-grown dog. A seed will become a full-grown oak tree. But it will never be anything more than simply what it's, like they call it, like an escalator, like its programming is. You know, this is like all the kids in school complain. All you do is put us on an escalator. Everyone has to be exactly the same. Everyone has to just go up the same exact process. So that is true of everything else in creation, including angels. They will never do more than what their trajectory is. Excuse me. They will never outpace the inevitable. Concurrently, just to finish this thought, they will never do anything beneath their ability. I mean, they can't help. The calf will become a cow. The sapling will become a tree, and it will produce fruit. It has no choice to say, no, I'm not going to contribute to the world. I'm not going to produce fruit. I'm not going to give of myself. Human beings are the only creation that can do more than its pathway is. If we engage our spiritual side to overcome our animalistic, impulsive, what's in it for me side, and we can, God forbid, do less. We can refuse to participate and be contributory to the world. Now, when we talk about the chayas, we're not just talking the life force. We're not just talking here about the sort of electromagnetic process that gives our physical body its mobility and its functionality. And again, obviously, that's very important. But that's not what is distinctive to human beings, because animals have that as well. They also have whatever it is, the biological side, which we're not here to discuss. We're talking about the distinctive characteristic of the human being. Now, we are distinctive because, again, opposable thumbs, the ability to make art, the ability to be athletic and train ourselves to play the piano, to coordinate our external skills, right? Two-step, whatever it is. But all of that is truly an expression of the distinctive human, maybe we might even say Jewish, spiritual, but we'll call it human here because we're using the word Adam, the distinctive human capacity for going beyond our mere programming. To say that I am not just a almost helpless product of my biology, that I am, or I contain within myself the capacity, just like we can physically look up and see the infinite expanse of the sky, all of that is manifest through the moichin. Now, when we say moichin, we translate as mind or brain. Again, we're not just talking about the organ, we're talking about the capacity to imagine that there is something more than myself. So it is true that the human being's fingers and feet can be trained in a way that you can't train an animal, again, to be artistic or to play music and so on and so forth. And that is a distinction that separates out the human being from the less sophisticated life forms. The primary source of that, though, again, that is a distinction, that we can ride bicycles and so on and play the piano. The primary distinction and source of that distinctive ability is contained within the moichin. And again, the mind or the brain, the ability to go outside of my biology, to imagine something more infinite than myself. And when that is contained, when that is harnessed better, it can be directed. And again, I don't play music, but music is essentially a form of math. In the very beginning of Torah, if you look in the Parsha of Bereshis, where it starts to list out the 10 generations from Adam until Noach. So we know about Adam and Cain and Abel, and of course we know about Noach, but there's all those, and this one begot that one. It starts to talk about the establishment of what we call society today. And one of them, and I think it was Tuval Chaim, but I could be wrong, is the founder of musical instruments. And it might seem odd to us, why is that something so important to be pointed out? But this is, and again, it's not my personal thing, but this is a primary illustration of the distinctive characteristic of human beings, which is to make music, because music is the combination of absolute rigid discipline. You don't just start banging away, on the piano and just striking the keys. So it's very, very, very disciplined, as discipline is math. And concurrently, it is expressive of something that's beyond discipline, something infinite. So it is the illustration through the fingers, let's say, or through the rigidity, that's probably the better word, of the infinite. And that is the capacity of the mind, not because we have higher IQs, but it's about the ability to go beyond myself and then to channel all of that into the rigidity. It's very much like the building of the Mishkan, which is sort of where we're headed here, which is a very precise architecture with every screw and nut and nail accounted for, down to every scrap of wood, combined with absolute infinity of Hashem. So the most disciplined behavior, which is building the Mishkan, it's not just some sort of scrapbooking, sort of chaotic, do whatever you want, that evokes the infinity of Hashem. And that's where we're headed with the Mishkan. So it works out very nicely because we'll be reading it in the parshas. It's kind of in the fore of our mind. So here we go. Al derech mashal, similarly, ikar giloi klolos hamshachas achayis. Lahachiyes oilam isva beruyim shebehem humulubish v'nichol b'ritzoyne v'chmasoi b'nosei v'daita yisparech. And nikar b'shem moichin. Okay, this is a long sentence, so I'm going to stop here and translate, although we'll come back and give you the whole thing. So we're following the analogy of the way that the neshama is primarily noticeable in the brain, and again, in the capacity to imagine something beyond myself, not just to be able to study 100 pages of the Talmud. because a person can be very knowledgeable and not be in any way more spiritually refined. They're just completely self-absorbed, and they've been trained to be knowledgeable like somebody is trained to perform some other act, and so on. So too, the primary expression of the life force to give life to the worlds, and we don't just mean functionality, and all the creations that are within them, that contains within it and is subsumed within the will and wisdom and analysis and understanding of Hashem, which is called the moichin, the intellect or the brain, the mind, the hein, and these are the very hamulubashim b'Torah mitzvah that become invested in Torah and its mitzvahs. The Giloi Klolos Hamshachazoi, and the revelation of this expression, who Makar Achayis, is the source of all life. Asher ha'olam es mekablin, that all these worlds receive, kol echad befratais, each one individualized. Again, when we say worlds, hopefully everybody looked at the chart that I sent, the 4 worlds, because there we come again back to those, which we'll get to maybe this week, maybe next week. Rak ha'ara mispashetus ir mimakar zeh kidimyon or mispashet mi'ashemesh al derech mashal v'kreiches ebi aguf mehamoyech hanal. Okay, I'm just gonna. It's a long sentence. I'm just gonna finish the Hebrew, I think, and then I'll come back and translate it. So I know it's a lot. Hopefully, you have an English Tanya there, so at least you can get the words if the Hebrew is unfamiliar. Makar zeh, this source, hu hanikra alma disgalia. That's called the revealed world. It's called the revealed world. My notes are falling down. It's called the revealed world, umatrinusa, and it's called the matron or the queen, which we'll talk about why that mashal. The ema tata, and the mother of this world. V'shchina, and it's called the shchina. Miloshin, from the phrase v'shechanti b'seicham, and I will dwell amongst them. Al shem shemakar zehu reishis eskalos orein soif, because this source is the beginning of all of this expression. Okay, I know it's a lot of verbiage, it's a lot of words, and it's a somewhat of a mystical concept. And considering we're in this wireless society, but I managed to tangle myself up in my thing. Hold on one second. Want to hang myself? There we go. Okay, so here we go. We set out with a metaphor, or it's an analogy, not a metaphor. The analogy is that just as the human mind is the seat where godliness meets the physical, and again, as we've talked about so many times, it's the portal of entry. It's the entry point where the infinity of Hashem connects itself with the finity of this physical world. What allows this world to absorb the infinity of Hashem? There's got to be a meeting point. Now, a meeting point, almost by rule, has to accommodate the primary needs of the two parties. Just like a bridge literally connects two land masses across a river or a body of water. So it's a little bit of point A and a little bit of point B, and they extend and extend as far as they can, and they meet in the middle. Similarly, all forms of connection have to be a little bit of each side. Where can they meet together? So we're talking about a meeting point of the infinite and the finite. So the infinite, Hashem, has a basic, I'll use this word, it's probably a sloppy usage, it has a basic need. Hashem is unknowable. He cannot be captured. You cannot get him, because in order to know something, the knower masters the idea. So you walk into the first day of class, you don't understand it, but then you master it, now you can utilize it. So you've mastered reading, now you can read anything. You've mastered math, now you can do mathematical equations. So Hashem can't be mastered. This is sort of the basic, I'll use this word, need of Hashem. He cannot be known. That's A. Human beings, we need to have some sense of stability, some sense of tangibility, something that we can hold on to. Otherwise, we feel lost. It's like trying to walk on water. There's no solidity to it, so you're just stumbling everywhere. There's nothing to hold on to. It's like being in total darkness. There's no contrast. There's nothing to get. So how can these two seemingly mutually exclusive entities, the infinite and the finite, come together? So the mechanism is that Hashem makes himself within the approximation of knowability, even if he's not within knowability literally, but within the approximation of knowability, we can kind of sort of know something about him. And God gives us a capacity to use knowledge to recognize the infinity, the infinite. One of the hardest parts of knowledge, as we've talked about in many other contexts, is to recognize that there are things that are unknowable, not just that I don't know them, but they are ultimately unknowable. We have a tendency as a species to think that anything that you can't know, well, that's just stupid. And that's seen as a negative. Although, as we talk about, there are things that are unknowable, not just because we're not smart enough and we haven't yet built a computer that's big enough, because it's very humbling. If I can never, and humanity can never master something, then I have to submit myself to it, which is very, very disturbing. It's very, very awkward and uncomfortable to recognize that there's something bigger than human capacity. And that's, like we've talked about so many times, in the process to coming to Hashem, there's always comes back to that bittul Mesiras Nefesh thing. And Mesiras Nefesh is not only in the great acts of heroism, it's the surrender of this concept or this pursuit or this principle that all things are ultimately knowable, that wisdom is the greatest of skills, and that we can eventually figure it all out and get some super duper computer that will figure everything out. And anything that can't be, I'm going to use this word, scientifically validated is thus bad. And to be able to have, so that's the most disturbing part of being in a relationship with Hashem, because I have to come to that recognition of total bittul, not just of my bittul, not just that someone else knows and I don't, but it's unknowable. So with this thought in mind, we are essentially addressing this issue. How can limited physical human beings have a relationship with the infinity of Hashem? Okay, so I talked a lot. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning of this lengthy sentence and see how it plugs in. So I'm going to go back here a little bit, almost to the beginning of the chapter where it said, and similarly or metaphorically, the primary revelation of the general expression of life. I hope you can find where that is. I mean, in the Hebrew, it's like the fourth line, right after the analogy, or right after the statement of the primary revelation of godliness. The primary revelation of our life form is in the intellect. Similarly, mamish, kacha mamish, similarly, analogously. Yeah, okay. So we go like this. I'm just going to do the English part. The primary revelation, that is, where can we see this general, that is, generic expression that Hashem has made it into this world, which is the fundamental question. How does an infinite God express himself in a finite world? To give life to the worlds and the creations in which he is invested, and that they should be subsumed in the ratzon, the will, and the wisdom, and the analysis, and the knowledge of Hashem, which is called moichet. That is, there's two ways that we can communicate what we truly want to somebody else. Now, one issue that we run into is that we don't always know what we truly want, because we may not understand it ourselves. That's why we go to doctors, because we don't know. I just don't feel well. I don't know what I need. The doctor can prescribe it. But when a person has a primary sense and they want to express it to somebody else. So we can become very frustrated. Anyone, again, it's easiest to illustrate it with children. Any child, he's all upset. What's bothering you? He doesn't know. He's 5, he's 10. He doesn't know what's bothering him. He's just feeling frustrated, or he's feeling anxious, or whatever it may be. But Hashem does know what he wants. So that is the Ratzon, what is truly passionate to Hashem. And Hashem has gone from the Ratzon into the Chacham, which is the undefined conceptual idea, and the Bina, where Hashem starts to analyze himself, and his Das, that he makes himself known. So when Hashem says, shake the lulav and esrog, eat the matzah, put it the mezuzah, hear the Megillah, yes, that is the true, on, full, complete passion, wisdom, will, desire of Hashem. It's not just some busy work, to stop bothering me, or this will make the world a better place, which it will. It is the ultimate expression of Hashem's identity. Now, the way we experience it on this side is just a very simple instruction. It is the very essence of Hashem. And that's what is invested in Torah and its mitzvahs. So when Hashem gives us a word of Torah, and when Hashem gives us a mitzvah action, he has truly embedded the infinity of his full-on intensity of self into the Torah and mitzvahs. Now, here's where we, on the receiving end, run into sometimes a difficulty. How come I doesn't see it that way? How come all I see it is flour and water that was baked in under 18 minutes, or shaking the lulav and esrog? So now I go and I do the mitzvah. I don't see thunder and lightning. I'm not overwhelmed by this great spiritual experience. It doesn't seem to have changed everything about me. So this becomes our number one challenge. Why is it on this side of the receiving that I'm not sensing all of this kind of infinity? Now, as I alluded to before, in Shayichet Ba'amunah, the Alter Rebbe is really going to focus on this, but here he's touching on it. And again, the essence of this chapter is, how can the finite and infinite have a relationship? So what has Hashem done? He's gone through, and again, I'll use this human word, he's gone through this tremendous effort to make himself available to us through bite-sized pieces, which, as we'll see, and you could probably anticipate this already because we've talked about it so many other times, Hashem gives it to us in a tangible, tolerable dosage that doesn't overwhelm us to the point that we can't function. He gives it to us in bite-sized pieces that we can incorporate within our existence and not be scared off and overwhelmed and frightened and subsumed and forfeit our affinity. Okay, it's very much the idea of the Mishkan. We're going to sort of see that as we get to it, but just because it's on our minds because of the parashas. One of the primary purposes of the Mishkan was a repair for the sin of the golden calf. What led us to the sin of the golden calf? So amongst all the different theories is that the experience at Sinai was so overwhelming, and the idea that Moshe would be up on a mountain for 40 days and 40 nights without food or water was so overwhelming that we scampered back to something that we could touch and feel and measure and hold on to. Because infinity is very frightening. A golden calf, Egypt, is very reassuring. I know it sounds bizarre, even though it was horrible, but at least you knew what it was. There was a certain structure there, and that was appealing at a certain level. You knew who you were. There wasn't any variety. There was no disruption. Everything was nice and smooth and calm. Now, but we see what it leads to when we become obsessed with the tangible and the material. So what was the remedy? The remedy is the Mishkan, which is the combination of the infinity of Hashem, as indicated by a divine cloud, and a cloud carries this duality as well. On the one hand, the cloud can block the sun. On the other hand, what's a cloud? You can't hold it in your hand. It's not substantive. It's not like physical dirt or gel. It's this amorphous, intangible, in a way even less tangible than fire, and why it becomes the perfect metaphor for Hashem's presence. It's both measurable and immeasurable, like the Mishkan. It's a place built on precise architecture, and it contains something infinite. Every mitzvah is very precise. A matzah is very precise. Every word of the Megillah, lulav, esrog, hadas, arava, we're studying it with the jeweler's loop, etc. And it communicates something very infinite, finite, infinite, all blended together, back and forth, the two of them together. So here, again, this is what Hashem has invested in the Torah and its mitzvahs. And the general expression of this is the source that all the worlds receive. And that's why when we do a mitzvah, we're not just affecting ourselves. We're not only just affecting this world, we're affecting all the spiritual worlds. As you recall from a couple of chapters ago, and we saw it in the Siddur, that the angels declare Hashem is kadosh, he's holy. And then they say, where is he blessed? In his place. Where's his place? Literally right here, in my house, in my shul, in my living room, in my office, in my job. That's where the infinity of Hashem is. I mean, as an illustration, because we're living through it right now. This year is a leap year. Now, there's nowhere in the Torah that tells us how to make leap years. It just alludes to it by saying that Pesach should always be in the spring. And since there is no concept of a lunar year, there's a solar year because of the sun's rotation and so forth. So we, human beings, really smart guys, but human beings created the idea of the leap year, which means, of course, that Pesach is going to be not 12 months after last Pesach, and Yom Kippur is not 12 months after last Yom Kippur. Now, we know that when we eat matzah, we're not only affecting me and you and my family, we're affecting the angels and the highest worlds and Atzilus and Adam Kadmon, and all of these spiritual things are affected by what? By me. And not only by me doing what Hashem said, but that is not me personally, that is we human beings are dictating when it's Pesach. So yes, Hashem told us to eat matzah on Pesach, but it's human beings who determine when Pesach is. As you'll note in the davening, especially this year, because it's Shabbos, in the first night of the first day of Pesach, we say in the Shemona Esrei, Mekadesh HaShabbos Ba'amo Yisrael V'Hazmanim. He sanctifies Shabbos, his people Israel, and the special designated times. So the question is, why do we separate out Shabbos and the time? Seemingly that we should say Mekadesh HaShabbos V'Hazmanim and Amo Yisrael, his people Israel. And we explained, because Shabbos is every 7 days. That God created. There's no phenomena in nature that dictates Shabbos. There's nothing you can observe. A month is the cycles of the moon, a year of the sun. There isn't the day, sun up, sun down. There is no phenomena in nature that dictates a week. So why is Shabbos every 7 days? That God made. Mekadesh HaShabbos. Bless you, God. He sanctified the Shabbos. And he sanctified the people Israel, who we now determine when the months are going to be. We're the ones who determine when Yontif is going to be. So not only is this true that through mitzvahs, we bring godliness into this physical world, it's through mitzvahs we effectuate the whole process. So again, to use another one of my more bizarre analogies, it's like a product. So you have an inventor who's sitting in his laboratory and he comes up with the best mousetrap. And all of the processes, he's got to design it and he's got to produce it and he's got to find the materials. And who validates this whole process of this very smart person who comes up with the greatest invention for the next widget? The consumer. Because if you don't buy it, then all of those processes are for naught. Everything, and even though you need it more than you know you need it. So the consumers don't realize what they need. They think they need this toy and they really need that toy. So the genius of the manufacturer is not what dictates the success of the product. The success of the product is exclusively via the purchase made by the customer who wanders into Walmart and buys this one and not that one. So too, Hashem creates all of the worlds. all of these processes, which are all only validated when we do mitzvahs. There's no need for all of these spiritual terms and concepts and stages of awareness that we've discussed, Adam Kadmon and Atzilus and all the Svidus and the angels and the higher level angels and the angels that are consumed by fire. They have no value any more than the manufacturing and so on has any value until Mr. and Mrs. Smith buy this product in Walmart. And if they don't buy the product in Walmart, the whole thing is garnished, is worthless. The whole thing has no value at all. So too here, all of them receive from this source. All of the worlds, all of the stages of awareness, each one down to its particularism. And this is the analogy of the light that spreads from the sun. Now, this is going to be a mashal that we're going to discuss a lot in the next section in Sha'ar Yichud V'Amunah. So we've talked about it before because we've touched upon it, and it's really emphasized there. So a simple illustration of it. When we go outside and you see a sun ray, so you say, oh, look, there it's sunny. Now, of course, the sun doesn't change. What changes is the expression of the sun. The sun ray that we see on the corner is an expression of the ball of the sun. And if we could somehow magically trace that sun ray all the way back, it would become subsumed within the infinity of the sun. We'd realize that the sun ray has no independent identity. It is an expression of the sun. But if the sun would show up on my front lawn, I would be overwhelmed by it, right? So what we can tolerate is the sun ray. But the mistake that we make is we start to think that the sun ray is the source itself, instead of realizing that the sun ray is the expression of it. The same thing can happen with a person. You know, to quote one of our former governors, Blagojevich, they made him governor, but then he thought he really was. He didn't realize he was just there to do what they told him. He thought he was really the governor. So then they had to teach him a lesson. They sent him to jail. We're very proud now. We currently have no former governors in jail. That's a big step for us. So this is sort of, quote, the problem. We start to think that we're something separated from the source. We start to imagine that we are not the product of the sun. So too, or the same with the world, we start to think that it has independent significance. I mean, the story of Purim is coming up. What is the whole message of Purim? Like the Gemara says, what did the Jewish people do that was so terrible that they were threatened with total annihilation? So the Talmud says, because they took pride in going to the feast of Achashverosh. Not that they went, because you're in a foreign land, you have to show respect, etc. The problem was, they said, you see, we made it in life because Achashverosh invited me to his party. So we put our faith in Achashverosh, rather than seeing that Achashverosh is only an expression of godliness and remembering that our true identity is Hashem. We started to take pride in being honored by Achashverosh. In fact, just to take that one step further, we know that on Purim, there is a value, an obligation to get to a point where we cannot tell the difference between blessed as Mordechai and cursed as Haman. So commonly, this is seen as almost half comical, but Chassidus takes this very seriously. And it says it's not just about drinking liquor, because drunkenness is not just about being so drunk where you don't know anything. Drunkenness means you get higher than your consciousness. And you know what? Ultimately, Haman comes from Hashem, like Mordechai comes from Hashem. What? That makes no sense. I can't, right? You got to be drunk on Purim to come to that level, to see that the sun ray that is Haman is the sun ray that is Mordechai. So the rest of the year, consciously, we spend our whole lives separating out between what is Haman and what is Mordechai, what is cursed and what is blessed. But this is a unique opportunity that we can touch such a level. It's not something that we do constantly. because ultimately they're all sun rays. And this is this metaphor. It's an analogy, not a metaphor. This analogy that the sun ray, we all know, really, it doesn't have its own substance. You can't go and grab it. You can't separate it from the sun. But sometimes we might make the mistake of thinking that that expression, that sun ray, is really its own authority, that it has somehow independent authority over me, separate from Hashem. So too, the power and strength of the body that comes from the Mayach. So my hand doesn't have separate power from my brain. I mean, there is, and again, I'm not here to study medicine, but there is such a biological phenomena. It's like a sickness where a person's body can't be controlled by its brain. They don't have, that's a sickness. That's not a health. That's how I say, wow, this is a really strong hand. It's independent. God forbid, that's a sign of unhealth, of dis-ease, not ease. And this source is called the world that is revealed. That's what we can see. We see the sun ray. We don't see the sun. We see the farmer. We don't see the power of Hashem that is bringing it. But it's a looking glass and it's an opportunity. And that's where the choice factor comes in. We can see these as opportunities to seeing the infinity of Hashem, or we can become so consumed with the sun ray, with this specific illustration, that we get distracted. And that's why it's called Matrunisa, the queen, and the Ema, Tata, and the Shechina. These are all obviously feminine terms. The role of the queen historically was an access point to the king. The king was considered inaccessible by the average person. They couldn't get to the king. So what did people do? They went to the queen. The queen became the access point to the king. You could go to the queen, and she had a more compassionate side, and you could access the queen through you could access the king through the queen. In fact, just to use an analogy, in 1950, when the previous Rebbe passed away, and the Chassidim were trying to petition the Rebbe to accept the role, so Chassidim went to the Rebbetzin. They went to his wife. They said, you have the capacity to access to your husband. He's pulling back. He's saying it's not something for him. And as we know, that's what she did. She went to him and she said, how could you allow all my father's work to just end? You have to take on this responsibility, after which the Rebbe did take on the responsibility. So the idea of the revealed world becomes an access point. Where we run into trouble is when we start to see it as its own identity. When we start to see the sun ray as having its own status instead of it being an expression of the sun. When we, Pharaoh is the ultimate who said, this is my river and I made it. So we say, well, that's bizarre. I mean, Pharaoh's not stupid, but his point is, whatever I've done, I did it on my own. I'm not dependent on anything. I come from nothing and I make it completely, entirely on my own. And this is a mentality that exists in our society. Again, we illustrate it in the most extreme to point out its absurdity. But conceptually, this is the idea. I did this completely on my own. I don't need nothing from nobody. This mentality, again, is the idea that we identify the sun ray and we forget about the sun. So the revealed world, what we can see, the queen who we have access to, who's got that compassionate characteristic, the Shechina, the divine presence, what we can see and touch and feel, we have to make that important distinction and understand that this is an opportunity for us to recognize that there's something far greater. When I say greater, more infinite is a better word, that these are access points too, rather than being consumed just with them. It's a little bit like the Dayenus. One of the explanations in Hasidus is that Dayenu is a little bit of a negative. What do you mean Dayenu? First of all, who asked you? Second of all, why are you being satisfied with something so defined? Hashem is infinite, but we get a little scared off with all that infinite. That's okay. I don't need all that infinite. I just need a little bit. Don't, again, easy for me to say in a very simplistic form, don't tell me to be frum. I just want my kids to marry Jews. Don't tell me about putting on tefillin. I don't want all that infinite. I just want a little bit of fun. I want to right size it myself. So again, all of these are these opportunities. That's that caring mother who produced the higher neshamas that are called the banim, where they have an intuitive awareness of Hashem. It's God existing in this world. It's that access point that we talked about with the queen. It's what we can see and touch and feel. Don't stop there. Don't think that that's where our relationship or our access to the infinity of Hashem ends. That's the beginning of our relationship with Hashem. That's the beginning of where we become introduced to the infinity of Hashem. But what could happen is we get so caught up with it and we get scared about anything beyond that we just want to be satisfied with that. And we're, rolling the dice here for all the marbles, pardon the analogy. We are trying to access the true infinity of Hashem and not be caught up only with the touch points here and there. And that's why it's the Shekhinah, v'shechanti b'seichem, I rest within you, I dwell within you. Hashem shemakar zeh horatius eskalos, or it's the beginning of the revelation of Hashem. It's the beginning. It's just the starting point. And again, what can happen is it becomes an end point. That it draws down and radiates into this world, what we can see. And from this source, we bring to each one what it needs. So the attenuated matching of the proper level of godliness, the tolerable level of godliness that is brought to every creation and every person and every created being starts with these processes. And again, I've used this analogy before. So the child's in first grade, they think their first grade teacher only knows the first grade material. Because again, that was their experience. What did my teacher teach me? We know the story, just to share. It's a beautiful story. So Reb Zalman Valenkin, who was the Rebbe's teacher in Cheder, when the Rebbe didn't go to school, they didn't have schools, they had like a tutor. He's the great-grandfather of Sarah Moskowitz from Bucktown. So when he came out of Russia, obviously he was an old man. So he came into Yechidus. So now the Rebbe stands up. So he is very uncomfortable that the Rebbe is standing up for him. So he says to the Rebbe, what am I supposed to do? The Rebbe tells him to sit down, but he's a chassid. But so the Rebbe said, okay, look, we sat together over the Gemara. We'll sit together now as well. In fact, I mean, he was an old man. It was a problem because he couldn't always stay for the whole Farbrengen. He's an old man. So they would take him out. So as soon as he got up, the Rebbe would stand up and disturb the whole Farbrengen. So he fell, and so on. When he passed away, the Rebbe paid for his funeral. So you say, well, he's the Rebbe. This guy taught the Rebbe Aleph Beis. He taught him the first few Mishnahs. But this is the point. You don't learn the first few Mishnahs, you're not getting to the Rebbe. You don't learn Aleph Beis, you're not getting to engineering. Shakespeare, you're not getting to Lahavdil, Shakespeare, if you didn't learn. So what happens? Hashem gives it to us like the first grade teacher gives it to the first grader. Not because that's the first grade teacher. That's the genius of the first grade teacher, is able to bring it into that tangibility and accessibility. Okay. And it dwells within them, to give them life. That's why it's called the mother of children. Because the mother, who's the access point, that the child always has this desire to curl up in his mother's lap and be aligned with his mother, creates banim who, again, have an intuitive children who have an intuitive desire to be close with Hashem. Al derech mashal, the Knesset Yisrael, or the Jewish community, Shemimakers and Ne'atzlu Neshamas Datzilis, and that's where it starts to express the Neshamas of Atzilis, the Nivru Neshamas the Bria, and it creates. And here the Alter Rebbe is using the verb form. I don't know if it's captured in the English, the verb form of the adjective form of the world. So, for example, the world of Atzilis, it means expressed, emanated, whatever emanated means. So there's a verb form, maybe it's an adverb, netzolu. It emanates into the world of emanation. Bria creates, it creates into the world of creation. These are all of those stages that Hashem is invested in. They're all only an expression of this divine life form, va'or, and light, mi'amakar hazan, nikra shechina, which is called the Shechina. So again, the Shechina is the access point. It's what we can touch, feel, and measure. And from there, we hopefully can work sort of, I don't want to say backwards is the wrong, but we can work into the depth and start to see the full-on infinity. Kispashas or mi'ashemesh, like the expression of light from the sun. So if we could imaginary follow the light, the sun ray that's on the street all the way back to the ball of the sun, we'd see the true on infinity. But what can happen sometimes, we get so consumed with that light, with that sun ray, that we forget that it is sourced in something far greater than itself. And as such, we sort of become consumed with the limited. And in part, that's our animal soul. Because the thing that our animal soul is most disturbed by is the infinite. Because it thinks, well, you're going to be consumed with infinite, you're not going to care for my animalistic impulses. The animal soul says, this is what I want, and that's the determinant. It's the intellect, and again, not genius, but it's the capacity to imagine beyond myself that cries out and says, there's something more than just my impulsive desire, buy me, take me, get me. Satisfy me. I'm here. What's in it for me? All right. Maybe we'll stop here. Continue next avach. All right.